There are moments in your walk with God when you realize He's not trying to repair what you've been holding on to. He's trying to destroy it. And the terrifying part? He does it on purpose. You pray for Him to rescue the relationship. You fast for Him to open the door. You plead for Him to bless the dream. But heaven remains silent. Or worse, the more you pray, the faster it falls apart. And you're left asking, why would a loving God let something die that I begged Him to save? Because sometimes what you wanted to keep is the very thing standing in the way of what He wants to give. And the longer you cling to what feels safe, the longer you postpone the surgery that could have healed you. God breaks what you try to protect when what you're protecting is killing your soul. He doesn't just prune the branch. He uproots the tree. You don't hear this often in sermons because it's not comfortable. But the truth is this. God is not interested in preserving the idols we've renamed purpose. He is not sentimental about the things that once brought us joy if those things now sit in His rightful place. So He breaks. He breaks the opportunity you worshipped. He breaks the version of yourself you couldn't let go of. He breaks the ministry you built around your ego. He breaks the relationship that defined your worth. Not because He hates you, but because He loves you too much to let you live with spiritual cancer dressed up as destiny. Sometimes you'll think the enemy is attacking you, but in reality, it's God doing the tearing. And it's not because you disobeyed, it's because you asked to be used. You said, "Here I am, Lord, send me." But you didn't know that meant, break me until there's nothing left but what you can use. That's where Isaiah found himself. In Isaiah chapter 6, the prophet writes, "In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord. Uzziah had been a symbol of security and success for Judah. His reign was long, prosperous, familiar. And Isaiah couldn't see the Lord until the thing he trusted most was removed." Sometimes, something has to die for your eyes to open. You'll never see the holiness of God if you're clinging to your own throne. He will shake the foundations, not to punish you, but to pull you into purity. He lets it fall apart because what's collapsing is what you never should have built on in the first place. He lets the door close because that job was never your calling. It was your escape route from surrender. He lets the person leave because you weren't in love, you were addicted to their affirmation. He lets the plan fail because your version of success would have made you proud, but never holy. And here's the sobering part. He sometimes saves what you try to bury. The moment you thought was behind you, the failure, the shame, the thing you swore you'd never talk about again. He resurrects it, but not as a curse, as a testimony. He saves what you tried to forget because it's through that brokenness that His glory shines the brightest. You wanted to save the business, but God wanted to save the night you almost quit because it taught you how to worship in the dark. You wanted to preserve the friendship, but God saved the heartbreak because it broke your pride and finally brought you to your knees. You wanted to keep the platform, but God saved the silence because that's where you heard Him again. God does not operate by your logic. He doesn't keep what flatters you. He preserves what shapes you. And the hardest thing you'll ever do as a believer is trust Him when He breaks what you thought He would bless. Oswald once said, "We are not asked to understand, but to obey." That means you won't always get an explanation. Sometimes, the only thing God gives you is the next step. And it looks like walking away from the thing you loved. It looks like grieving something you thought He'd resurrect. It looks like obedience without comfort. But on the other side of the death is the glory. On the other side of the fire is the image of Christ formed in you. You're not being punished. You're being purified. And sometimes it means God lets the dream die. Not because it was bad, but because it was in the way. He loves you enough to tear down what you built without Him. He loves you enough to disrupt what you called safe. He loves you enough to let you hurt if it means you'll finally be healed. So here's the question no one asks out loud. Can you still say amen when the answer is no? Can you still call Him good when He doesn't give you what you prayed for? Because if you can, then you've crossed over from religious comfort to true surrender. You've stopped following Him for what He can give you and started loving Him for who He is. Some of the most painful seasons in your life are not satanic attacks, but divine operations, quietly designed by God to dismantle everything you built without Him. Not because he enjoys your pain, but because he loves you enough to stop you from worshiping your plans. He knows that if he doesn't intervene, you'll end up a prisoner of your own expectations, bowing at the altar of control, calling it faith. So he breaks what you prayed to protect. He strips what you begged him to bless. And while you sit there in the silence, staring at the ashes of what once felt sacred, he whispers, "Now we can begin." You thought that being chosen meant being preserved, but with God, being chosen often means being torn. Not out of anger, but out of refinement. You see, what you're calling loss, heaven calls pruning. What feels like rejection might actually be realignment. You asked to be used, but you didn't realize that vessels must first be emptied. You wanted anointing, but you weren't prepared for the breaking it required. Because God doesn't pour himself into containers that are still full of themselves. And so, like a potter with the clay, he crushes what you called progress in order to shape what he calls purpose. We see this principle in the words of Jesus when he said, "Unless a grain of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains alone. But if it dies, it bears much fruit." The fruit doesn't come from preserving the seed in a safe place. It comes from allowing it to disappear into the soil, to decompose, to be hidden, forgotten, pressed down. There are things in your life that will only produce fruit once they die. And the tragedy is that we often keep holding them up to God, begging him to revive what he already declared finished. We keep watering a dream that's rotting, not realizing that he's letting it die so that resurrection will be his alone to credit. But here's the part no one wants to admit. Sometimes the dying takes time. Sometimes you bury something in obedience and then wait for years without a sign of life. You wonder if God heard you, if he saw your surrender, if he noticed the cost. And all he says is, "Trust me." That's when you discover what surrender really means. Not just letting go of outcomes, but continuing in obedience even when nothing looks like it's changing. And in that place of stillness, in the tomb of your expectations, you begin to realize that he's not ignoring you. He's forming you. The pain is not punishment, it's purification. He's removing your dependence on applause, on results, on clarity. He's pulling out the root of performance and replacing it with the seed of humility. Because when you finally stop trying to save what God is killing, you discover the freedom of letting him define your calling. It's not about success. It's not about visibility. It's about becoming someone he can trust with his presence. That's why he doesn't always bless the dream. That's why he sometimes takes what you begged him to leave. Because he's after something deeper than what you're praying for. He's after surrender. And in the mystery of his mercy, he often saves the very things you tried to bury. The wound you thought disqualified you becomes the doorway to someone else's healing. The shame you carried in silence becomes the platform from which you speak with power. The brokenness you begged him to erase becomes the place where his glory is undeniable. Because God doesn't just redeem what's good, he resurrects what was lost. That's what he did with Peter. After Peter denied Jesus, he ran, defeated and ashamed, convinced his story was over. But Jesus came for him, not with condemnation, but with restoration. 3 denials met with 3 questions. Do you love me? And with each yes, Jesus rewrote the memory. That's what God does. He saves what you wanted to forget and repurposes it for his kingdom. And maybe that's what he's doing with you right now. Maybe the silence is not absence, but sacred preparation. Maybe the thing you didn't fix was the very thing that made room for deeper intimacy. Maybe the door he closed was never your prison, but your protection. And maybe, just maybe, what looks like the end is only the beginning of a version of you that's more yielded, more emptied, more ready. Because the heart that has nothing left but Jesus is the heart he can finally use. This isn't the version of faith that trends well. It's not glamorous or marketable, but it's real. And it's the only kind of faith that will survive the fire. Chambers once wrote, "It is only the brokenhearted who truly know God. Not the confident, not the gifted, not the self-assured, but the broken. Because the broken stop performing. They stop pretending. They stop building altars to themselves and finally say, 'Whatever you want, I'm yours.' And that's when he moves. That's when he starts. That's when the crushing turns to communion. So if you're standing in the middle of the wreckage, don't curse it. Thank him. Thank him that he didn't let you succeed without him. Thank him that he took what would have destroyed you. Thank him that he didn't answer your prayer the way you imagined. Because what he's doing is deeper than you know and more beautiful than you can yet see. You're not being overlooked. You're being reduced to what matters. And what matters is him. There comes a point in your walk with God when you stop asking him to rebuild what broke and start asking him to rebuild you. Not your career, not your reputation, not your carefully arranged timeline. You, the version of you that surrendered halfway. The version of you that trusted him until it hurt. The version of you that worshiped loudly in public, but held back your obedience in private. That version cannot carry what God has in mind. So he lets the image shatter. He allows your greatest strength to crack in half. He allows your name to be misunderstood, your plans to be delayed, your foundation to be shaken. Not because he's cruel, but because he's done letting you live in partial surrender. This is what most people never tell you about intimacy with God. The closer you get, the more exposed you become. His love doesn't just comfort you, it confronts you. It lays bare every motive, every hidden agenda, every false identity you've leaned on for security. And when he finds anything in your heart that competes with his voice, he removes it. Sometimes slowly, sometimes all at once, but always with a purpose. Because the things you try to preserve are the very things that would have poisoned your calling if left untouched. So he cuts them away. He takes the idol you disguised as ministry. He takes the approval you crave from people. He takes the vision that secretly centered your name, not his. He removes everything that cannot survive his presence. And what's left, often confused, humbled, and empty, is finally usable. You prayed for glory. He gave you surrender. You prayed for expansion. He gave you silence. You prayed for influence. He gave you brokenness. Because what you wanted was platform, but what he wanted was death, the kind of death that only produces life on the other side. That's what Paul meant when he said, I've been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. Paul didn't just preach resurrection. He lived crucifixion. And maybe that's the missing ingredient in your faith right now. You want the fruit of the Spirit, but you're resisting the cross that produces it. You want peace, but not the pruning. You want power, but not the process. You want purpose, but not the pain. But God doesn't anoint the untouched. He anoints the crushed. He pours his oil into the wounds, into the weaknesses, into the places where your strength failed and your tears spoke louder than your prayers. That's where he meets you. That's where he reveals himself. Not in the places you've perfected, but in the places you've surrendered. And this is why he sometimes saves what you try to forget. Because what you call a failure, he calls a foundation. What you buried in shame, he resurrects in glory. You wanted to erase the story, but he wants to use it. You thought that mistake disqualified you, but it's the very evidence of his mercy. Not because the sin didn't matter, but because his grace is greater. And when you finally stop hiding what hurt you, you'll discover that he's already standing in the middle of it. Not ashamed, not angry, but redeeming every broken part for his purpose. Think of Joseph, sold by his brothers, falsely accused, imprisoned and forgotten. For years, it seemed like God had abandoned him. Every promotion was followed by another pit. Every moment of hope ended in loss. But what Joseph didn't see, and what we so often forget, is that God wasn't building Joseph's status. He was building Joseph's character. He was emptying him of entitlement, stripping him of pride, carving into him the kind of integrity that could carry the weight of destiny without collapsing. And when the time was right, not convenient, not easy, but right, God elevated him. Not because Joseph demanded it, but because he was finally ready. What if the delay in your life isn't punishment, but preparation? What if the silence isn't rejection, but invitation to deeper trust, to deeper worship, to deeper surrender? What if the very thing you keep asking him to restore is what he's intentionally leaving undone, so that your dependence shifts from the outcome to the source? This is maturity, when you can say, even if you don't fix it, I'll follow you anyway. That's when he knows he can trust you. That's when the breaking turns into building. That's when the wilderness becomes holy ground. Because God doesn't need your success. He needs your yes. And sometimes, the loudest yes is the one whispered through tears when nothing makes sense and still you refuse to let go of his hand. So if you're standing in the middle of unanswered prayers, if your faith feels raw, if your heart is heavy with everything you thought would look different by now, don't rush to escape it. Stay, be still, listen, because he is there, not to explain himself, but to reveal himself. And what he's doing in you is more important than what he's doing around you. One day, you'll look back and thank him for every no, for every door that stayed shut, for every dream that died, for every season that felt like abandonment, but was actually the safest place you could have been, right in the center of his will. Because the life you were trying to protect could never compare to the one he's been writing in silence. And that's the beauty of surrender. You lose what you built, but you gain what he designed. At some point, every follower of Jesus is faced with a crossroads. Keep asking God to rebuild what once brought comfort, or let it stay buried and trust that something better, something eternal, is being born in its place. This is not about giving up. It's about giving in. It's about finally surrendering the belief that you know what your life should look like. It's about trading the illusion of control for the peace that only comes when your hands are empty, but your heart is full of him. This is where real faith begins, not in answers, but in surrender. And surrender is not passive. It's a posture of warfare in the kingdom of heaven. It's what turns suffering into oil. It's what transforms delay into depth. It's what makes broken people whole, not because their lives are perfect, but because their hearts belong entirely to God. You have to understand this. What he broke, he didn't break to shame you. He broke it to shape you. He allowed it to end because it was never meant to be your foundation. And yes, it hurt. Yes, it felt like betrayal. Yes, you still think about what it could have been if he had just answered the way you asked. But what you couldn't see in the moment was that he was doing more than rescuing you. He was redeeming you. And that kind of redemption doesn't come through painless prayers. It comes through crushed dreams and empty tombs. It comes through nights of silence and mornings of still no. It comes through the sacred ache of realizing he's not going to give you your idol back just because you put a Christian label on it. He will not share your heart with the very thing that competes for your affection. That's why he tears down what you try to save. Not to leave you empty, but to make room for the thing you didn't even know you needed. He takes your version of joy and replaces it with something deeper, something that doesn't waver when seasons change. He removes the relationships that were built on dependence instead of love. He lets the title go, the platform fall, the plan unravel, until all that's left is the cross and the question, will you still love me if I never give it back? This is not cruel. This is covenant. God is not raising up a generation of convenience. He's raising up a generation of conviction. People who don't just sing, I surrender all, but live like it. People who still show up when the door doesn't open. Who still believe when the dream stays dead. Who still obey when the miracle doesn't come. Because their faith was never in the outcome. It was in the one who never changes. And if you've walked through a season like that, you know exactly what I mean. You know the sting of loss. You know the ache of waiting. You know the heaviness of watching something fall apart, piece by piece, while heaven feels distant and silent. But here's what I need you to hear. Not one piece was wasted. Not one tear was unnoticed. Not one moment of confusion was missed by the eyes of your Father. He saw it all. He held it all. And even when it looked like nothing was happening, he was building the foundation of something that would last beyond this life. He wasn't punishing you. He was preparing you for a glory that doesn't depend on applause, success, or fulfillment, but on intimacy. Because what you gain in these seasons isn't the answer, it's him. And when you have him, even the loss becomes sacred. Even the silence becomes sweet. Even the breaking becomes beautiful. Because he is the treasure. He is the point. He is the portion that doesn't run out. Everything else can fall away. Everything else can burn. But if you still have Jesus, you have enough. So what do you do now? You stop trying to resurrect what God buried. You stop waiting for permission to grieve what he never meant to return. You let go, not with bitterness, but with worship. You say thank you for the breaking. Thank you for the no. Thank you for taking what I thought I couldn't live without. Because I see now what I couldn't see then. You weren't trying to hurt me. You were trying to free me. And now that I'm free, I don't want to go back. I don't want the idol. I don't want the false comfort. I don't want the version of my life that doesn't make room for glory. I want you. That's the point. That's the purpose. That's the testimony. Not that everything worked out, but that even when it didn't, I found Jesus in the wreckage. I found him in the middle of unanswered prayers, in the middle of pain, in the middle of what I thought would be the end. And what I found was enough to change everything. So maybe today you need to stop asking, why did you break it? And start asking, what are you building in me now? Because he didn't save what you wanted, but he saved you. He didn't preserve what you planned, but he preserved his purpose. And that is mercy. That is love. That is the goodness of a God who is not afraid to disappoint your expectations if it means fulfilling his eternal design. So let him write the story. Let him keep what he knows is good. Let him burn what was never meant to last. And let your heart finally rest in the truth that nothing surrendered to Jesus is ever wasted. If this word stirred your soul, don't keep it to yourself. Share it. Let it reach someone who's sitting in their own ashes, wondering if God sees them. And if you're ready to stop protecting what he's breaking and start trusting what he's building, write in the comments, I surrender what I tried to save.